Hello and welcome to the second discussion event in Sustainability First series, Together for a Fair Climate Future. The series considers the relationship between the climate crisis and fairness in society. The first event set out visions for a more sustainable future, actions we need to take, and how to engage a diversity of voices in UK's climate response. This second event will look at what we value in society, reflecting on the COVID pandemic, how it has impacted people differently, and how it might change what we view as important in society. What lessons from the pandemic could help in addressing the climate crisis? The series will feed into the International Climate Change Conference in Glasgow later this year, and we're very grateful to National Grid, who is sponsoring the work as a principal partner for the COP26. So today's event is streaming live to YouTube. Please share any questions and comments in the chat. My colleague Sonia will be joining the YouTube discussion and will feed some of your questions into our debate today. Please be aware that the panel can't see the chat directly as we're live streaming from Zoom. The event has captions and we'll be tweeting with the hashtag #FairClimateFuture. So I wanted to give you some context to the discussion and why we feel it's important. It's been a year since our lives have been completely changed by COVID. It's impacted people around the globe in different ways. We've experienced grief, loss of life, and jobs. For some people, it's also been a huge financial struggle. It's not just about the physical impact of the virus on our health, but the mental impact of isolation. We've realised the importance of touch, not being able to hug our loved ones. We've learned to communicate differently, sharing important moments digitally with birthdays, weddings, and funerals on Zoom. We've learned to be creative and have fun within constraints, baking, making, taking classes online, and teaching children remotely, appreciating the local environment through daily walks and small acts of kindness with gratitude for frontline workers. It's likely that we will emerge from this experience changed, with a renewed appreciation for the freedoms that we once took for granted. So how does this relate to climate change? This is another huge global crisis which will touch everyone's lives. And unlike the pandemic, which arrived so quickly and unexpectedly, climate change is something that we know is happening. It's challenging because we can't necessarily see it. It's too big to grasp. And it can be hard to imagine that making changes in our lives to reduce our carbon footprint could really make a difference. But what COVID has shown us is how our individual actions do tangibly make a difference. Staying at home, wearing a mask, keeping a distance saves lives. And we'll look back on this period at what we've all been part of as one of the greatest acts of human compassion and kindness of our generation, making sacrifices to protect each other. So this event will be in two parts. First, we will reflect on what we've learned through the COVID pandemic and how the experience may change what we value in society. And by values, we mean what's important, the different principles which guide our lives. And second, we will focus on what values we need to live sustainably. Can we move beyond a focus on economic growth to social and environmental well-being? And how in practice can societal values shift? How can we maintain a focus on climate change as we recover from the pandemic? So as you can see, we've got a lot to cover today, and we've got a fantastic panel to help explore these topics. We're also bringing in wider perspectives through short video contributions. So let's start by meeting the panel. Can we get the panel up? Could you each introduce yourselves and say a little bit about your work and why you're interested in this topic. I'll start with James.
Well, hello everybody. Delighted to be part of this conversation. My name is James Cameron. I'm trained as a barrister and I taught law as well as practice for many years. And I've been a serial public goods entrepreneur, I suppose you'd call it. I wrote the first law review article on state responsibility for climate change back in the 80s. And that was the result of being asked a question by Greenpeace and whether we could take the United States of America to the International Court of Justice for failure to act on climate change in 1988. And so I've had, over 30 years of working on climate change in a number of guises. And I'm currently working on the COP26 campaign and something associated with the government, but not part of the government, called the Friends of COP26. And that's a place where we can direct a lot of our hope and attention over the next few months. It's one of the reasons why this conversation is so interesting and important, and I'm delighted to be of some use to you.
Thank you very much. That's great. And Tatheer, could you say a bit about your work?
Hi, thank you so much for taking me on the panel. I am currently working as a coordinator for Climate Challenge Fund for networking key services and gas, and we work for South Asian community, that is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And we are working in Edinburgh since last 32 years now. And my experience of work in energy, environment, and was in Pakistan for 4.5 years, and now I'm doing as a climate challenge coordinator. So for the community, that is the link between my background and currently my work. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Hay. I'm the Executive Director at the What Works Centre for Wellbeing here in the UK. We're a collaborative evidence centre trying to understand what organisations can do to improve wellbeing, whether that's in the government public sector, whether it's in the business sector or in the third sector, and particularly understand and value what is really important to us and understand the role different policy areas, including economic policy, can play in achieving inclusive and sustainable wellbeing.
And are you also involved in a House of Lords inquiry as well on COVID?
Yeah, I'm a specialist advisor to the House of Lords Committee on Life After COVID, looking at how the shift to digital, which was happening anyway, that's been accelerated, has impacted our social and economic well-being, and what that might look like for the future in this hybrid world.
Thank you. And also I'll introduce Dylan. So Dylan was one of the prize winners for Sustainability First Essay Prize last year, which looked at how we build from the COVID crisis to a more sustainable future. And his essay was refreshingly different from what everybody else's, because he, rather than just looking at the practical steps we need to take, he sort of took a step back and said, what do we need to change in terms of the way we value things in society and how we act with kindness in society. So it was really thought-provoking, and it has inspired this discussion today. So we thought it'd be great to involve Dylan. Did you want to say a little bit about your work?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an honor to be part of this. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a third-year university student studying philosophy at University College London. And my interests are focused on the philosophy of self. And as you already mentioned, yeah, I first got involved with Sustainability First by submitting my work for the essay prize, primarily focused on the relationship between how we can use our values to deal with crises such as the pandemic and the sustainability issues.
Thank you. And William Bock is also with us today. So William is an artist, and he won our art prize for the Sustainability First art prize last year. And he's also a visual scribe, and so he's going to be doing drawings of what we're discussing today. So William, do you just want to say a little bit about your practice?
Hello, Claire. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here and capturing this fascinating conversation. I'm a visual artist, interdisciplinary, socially engaged artist. I work in lots of different ways, but one of the things I also do is capture conversations like this through illustration. So I'll be drawing and kind of visual note taking as everyone's going to be speaking today. So yeah. So you can, my profile picture will become the drawing, so you can tune into it throughout the discussion.
Thank you. And I'm Claire Dudney, so I'm an artist. I weave and paint, and I do printmaking. I'm also been working in climate change policy for the past 15 years, and I'm leading this programme of work for Sustainability First. And Sustainability First is a charity and think tank focused on social, environmental and economic wellbeing. So let's start the discussion. So first we're going to look at how has the COVID pandemic impacted our values. We've got a few short videos to start, and Tatheer has very kindly connected us with some local residents in Scotland from the South Asian community who will share their experiences of the pandemic. And they refer to NKS, which is the Networking Key Services, which is the health and welfare organisation in Edinburgh. And we'll also look at the issues of debt, and we'll look at the role of art and creativity during this period.
I value family most, and family and friends, I miss them very much. My daughter stays in New York and I have not seen her for over a year. I usually see her four times a year, but I miss that.
I'm a very social person and I value the most thing is my family and then my friends.
I value most is my family, my job and my health.
The thing I value the most is our natural environment, which directly affects all of us. I believe in maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and therefore I buy locally produced food as much as I can. I try to go out for a walk at least 2 or 3 times a week. I'm also a very sociable person who likes to meet people, talk to them, and also help them.
Lots of things have changed over the lockdown. First of all, the contact with my friends, going to my centers, I go to 2 centers. I miss them both. Personal contact I miss as well.
Lots of things been changed, and it's lots of sadness and lots of tragedy I had. I lost my mom. I lost my relatives.
My experience is once in a lifetime experience. I'm a little bit heartbroken in the beginning, but got used to it as the days, weeks and months went by.
Affected me a lot. I don't have to go out very much. Whether I've been seeing people online.
And the bad thing is that I can't see my friends and family, which I miss a lot.
I have been working from home since the pandemic started on 19th of March 2020, which has been literally a very, very difficult time for me because I am totally, as I said earlier on, I was a people's person, like to meet people, talk to people, help people. But during the pandemic period, I could not settle down initially and work from home. However, as time passed, I made myself adjustment and I got better. And with NKS using Zoom, giving us the opportunity to use Zoom, and therefore meeting people through Zoom helped me a lot.
The good thing is that I've been able to learn some digital things.
Learning digital skills, I enjoyed it most, so that I can be in touch with my friends on Zoom, and we celebrate all the activities like I've done that, gardening and that. I have enjoyed teaching some cooking classes, some like pickle making and salads and things.
My name is Leanne D. I run a debt advice centre in Birmingham in partnership between Gas Street Anglican Church and Christians Against Poverty. We've all experienced isolation in the pandemic, but imagine facing the isolation of problem debt during a pandemic. Over 9 million households were in that position at the beginning of last year. In that double isolation, people all the more need a listening ear as well as a clear plan. There are many aspects to poverty. Rather than working in isolation, many Birmingham organisations are pulling together. What so often helps clients get through is knowing that there are people who have the time to value them as human beings. Lockdown has been painful, but it has forced us to stop and hear the birds sing. When lockdown ends, we will all need to pull together to help many of our fellow citizens find a way through for the years ahead.
Hello, I'm Darren John, an artist based in London, and I'm making self paintings to revive the creative imagination, encouraging that super curious, playful spirit we all have in childhood that can become diluted somewhat as we move into adulthood. Now, in the first lockdown in 2020, I had little access to my studio, and so I set up a desk in the corner of my partner's house in the kitchen. Very limited materials. I embarked on a 26-part painting video series, sharing my results online, using whatever I could find in the house. So those drawers with batteries and plasters and candles would potentially become new materials I could use. Now, the project was not about showing people how to make paintings, but what it is about is showing people that they can shift their mindset and have a more playful experience of their surroundings. The project was a fantastic success. The project is seen as a resource in schools, homeschooling, people from all walks of life and creative ability. Now, what the project shows us is two things. Firstly, creativity will always thrive in times of adversity. It's the necessity to innovate and expand and problem solve that allows us to move forward. But more importantly, by shifting our mindset of the way we approach our world, we'll provide a much more enriched and extended experience of it, which is so important. To find out more about the project, just visit creativityunderquarantine.com, or to see other projects of mine, you can find me on Instagram @DarrenJohn.
Oh, thank you to all our video contributors. That was really fantastic to get a snapshot of people's experiences during this time. So we had local residents sharing their experiences of the loss and sadness at not seeing friends and family and finding new ways to connect online. And Leanne reflects on the impacts of debt and isolation through the pandemic. And Darren showed us how incredibly playful ways to make art from household materials to lift our spirits during lockdown. So I wondered if we could start with Tatheer. Thank you so much for putting us in touch with some of the people that you work with in your community. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen the pandemic impact people and potentially change their sense of what is important, and how you've worked with those communities to help them connect during this difficult time.
Thank you so much. It was like, at the very beginning, it was very hard, and we ourselves were nowhere when we started. And we, the team working at NKS, we started with the digital trainings initially to make people connected to they could start communicating. That way they could have the fear and the stress out when they will see each other. So we had to train people, we had to train our colleagues, we had to work days and nights, so because there was no other way we could communicate and we could engage them. And then secondly, in the second part, when we were successful in our first part, and this first part was not only young people, they were all elderly, young people, plus moms and toddlers. Everybody was in our target group. And then in a second phase, we started with our Climate Challenge Fund activities, which were for cookery sessions. Moms were very interested, ladies were very interested. And then we had stitching classes. That was an interactive sessions, and people would come up with their own recipes, on their own activities. Then plus we started with the gardening thing. So we got support from Royal Botanic Garden, very huge support from them. And we started to started workshop with people so that they can start home gardening and indoor gardening and home gardening, and it was fantastic. And every time we go 25 above participants, and it was for a whole year during lockdown. Until November we were getting responses of harvest and pictures. So through that way we had engaged all people, all levels, kids, moms, ladies, elderly, everybody. So initially it was very depressing time, but as the time went by, months and the whole year, they were quite confident in using Zoom and different communication apps online. So that was our main target, and luckily we were successful in conducting our whole range of activities for waste, for energy, for gardening, and so it was every week, every day. It was a 1 hour, 1.5 hour session, and people were, communicating with each other. And even we had arranged an exercise class to make them motivated. So that was the work. I'm happy that we have delivered, and still we are delivering. Still we are in the same situation, but people are less stressful, happy to join. So yeah, that is the outcome.
That's great. That's I think we've seen a lot how this shift to digital, although it was difficult initially for people, has actually opened up so many more ways of connecting. And we were thinking earlier about how you can connect so much more now internationally as well, because it's so much easier to bring together people on these sorts of platforms. I think Darren did an absolutely fantastic video about creativity, and you were also talking about these ways that people have been creative through gardening and cooking. I wondered maybe if James, if you could talk a little bit about the role of creativity in lockdown, the importance of it.
Yeah, I love those videos. Brilliant, well done. And it made me think of both the literal and metaphysical idea of connection. And I've always loved the great E.M. Forster quotation from Howard's End: only connect the prose and the passion. But that quote ends up with a promise of no longer live in fragments, I think is the end of that quote. And it's a brilliant notion. And in a way that the connection that Tatheer and her colleagues have done through Zoom and others is obviously a deeper connection between human beings in need, and how fulfilling that is for those who provide it as well. But equally, Dan's brilliant video shows precisely how in times of conflict, one has to be creative. And indeed, the climate change issue is precisely one of those examples too, because we have to exercise within constraint. We have boundaries, physical, environmental boundaries, atmospheric boundaries that we are breaching. But the constraint itself is creative. It produces an opportunity to innovate. And as an artist, you know that there is a constraint in form. There's constraint in the form, whether it's the shape of a canvas or a wall, which you always want to push at the edges of, or ask an engineer how they work with constraint. I need this output, but I can only give you this amount of space, or this amount of energy, or this amount of water. Can you produce the real world solution that I'm looking for? An engineer loves that challenge. So this is where we are. We're in a situation where, whether it's the constraint imposed by the risk associated with COVID, or the risk associated with climate change, they're opportunities for innovation, and they require both connection, physical, literal, but also emotional, spiritual, the kind of connection that makes us more than ourselves. And they require the kind of creativity, imaginative creativity, to find solutions where perhaps we didn't know they were.
Thank you. That's great. And I totally agree in terms of, as an artist, having some kind of boundaries within, I call it boundaries within which to play, it can be really helpful. And you can see that with Darren's video, that the constraint of being stuck in the house with just things, household objects, he's found all these incredible ways to make and inspire. Nancy, I wondered if you could talk a bit about the role of well-being during this time, and also the impact the pandemic may have on people's mental health, and what this means for our policies and our recovery from COVID.
This is brilliant. brilliant to come after the videos we've just seen as well, and the experience that Tatheer has talked about in Glasgow, in Scotland, sorry, and it brings to life exactly the things that we hear. So the family, the friends, the job, the health, the local environment that we're part of and have spent a lot of time in, and our community and volunteering, and how we help people adapt to this new situation. So we experience sadness, we then get hang of using new technology and helping people do that, because actually otherwise that can reinforce isolation. We talked about the impact of the pandemic on different groups of people and what it is. So well-being, when we're talking about it here, is how we're doing, just very broadly, how we're doing as individuals, communities, and as a nation, and how sustainable that is for the future. And what we're able to see from the well-being data of a range of different surveys is that whilst actually on overall, we're mostly pretty resilient to really a large number of different life events. And we're resilient exactly because of the things that have been described here today. So being active, having a shared interest with other people, connecting with others, working, volunteering, exercising, all of these things helped us cope really well. And actually most people that was the case. But what we can also see is if we look beyond those averages, that actually people had very different experiences. So for those who experienced financial difficulties, anxiety was over a third higher, and people were concerning. So you can see this concern about the impact of jobs and livelihoods on our well-being, and the importance of that for many people. So I think 25% of people found that work was really positive thing for their well-being, and were able to fit it more around their life and work from home. So we can see that. We can also see that homes became more important during this time. So normally we can adapt, but actually our living space and our local green space. So what we see in the wellbeing data is that engagement with our local green space, not just existing or having a garden, actually using it and being in it in some way, is the thing that helps equalize quality of life within a place. And we saw that 100 times over this pandemic. What wellbeing allows us to do is expand the range of options available to tackling climate change, see where we adapt, see where we don't, see where we compare ourselves to others and reduce those, and the importance of that safety net for people. And so we can broaden out our climate change options to this broader range of things. So the last thing I wanted to say was how it affected our mental health and our loneliness. So the speakers and the videos have shown us how important that connection with other people is, and that sense of community and being part of something bigger than ourselves, and of sort of organized helping and volunteering, and the community groups that help people. All of that was really important. What we did see though was where people already had poor mental health, particularly long-term or fluctuating serious mental health conditions, they were more likely to deteriorate, and those who were already likely to experience loneliness were more likely to experience loneliness. The rest of us actually did better in many ways, sought connection with other people, and that's why things like being able to use the technology and being helped to use that technology so they don't feel fear and stress in doing it, and so it doesn't become a barrier and reinforce the loneliness, is absolutely fundamental from the research. So it's brilliant to hear those types of examples.
Thank you. Yeah, and I wondered, Dylan, maybe if you could say something about how you feel the pandemic has made us reassess our values. What can we do to change our values?
Yeah, so the first thing is it's definitely made us have to consider, prioritize, and appreciate what is important in our lives. It's allowed us to sort of laser focus and put our values to the test. Things, generally speaking, versus personal convenience versus doing our part to help each other, or the economy weighed up against the value of a human life. But more specifically, we've mentioned this before, the importance of each other. So times of crisis and tragedy has, for a very harsh price, made us realize we need to work together, and not only as individuals, but to recognize that we affect each other in many more different ways than we thought imaginable. Isolation and distance has, almost in an ironic sense, made us even more aware of how interconnected we are. The second thing is there's this full realization of what this all means for us. A crisis demands vision, creativity, as we've seen before, empathy, compassion, and critical thinking. And that can be very, very difficult and at times frustrating when we see other people not necessarily sharing the same values as we do. And the final thing is self-reflection, the necessity to be educated, to explore our potentials, our creative potentials, to examine our habits, actions, and thoughts, to see how we can cope and respond to what's happening in the world.
Thank you. No, that's great. Does anyone want to come in on that? Yeah, I thought you would. And also, James, if you come in, can you say something about Nancy mentioned about our connection to local places? And I wondered how the role of cities might change as well. And I know that you've got experience because you are a Sustainable Development Commissioner in London. I wondered if you could say something, in addition to following on from Dylan's comments, about how cities might change in the future as we don't need to go into work, as we don't need to go to a central place to shop. Yeah, what that might look like. Thank you.
Yeah, well, first, as you could tell, I really loved what Dylan was saying and what he wrote before. And in particular, there's something I wanted to draw out, which it's quite easy to attribute all the way back to Aristotle, really, and the sort of practical philosophy that he promoted, where to give an example from his work and his comments just now, you can think kind thoughts, but you have to practice kindness. It has to be something that you do with another human being, and that's something that we really have valued and can pay close attention to with the experience of the last year and a bit. Aristotle also wanted to link goodness, learning, and effort. That those three ideas are part of his practical philosophy offering, and one that was constantly being challenged. And he also was someone profoundly interested in the natural world and a brilliant naturalist himself. But the idea that one could focus your virtues on goodness, learning, and effort, that seems to be phenomenally relevant and contemporary from ancient Greece to today. But yes, you're right, Claire. I've spent a lot of time thinking about and working on cities as a London Sustainable Development Commissioner now over two terms. We released a report yesterday, actually, on sustainable development goals for London, and I've been thinking about what the future of London looks like post-pandemic. And one thing that's emerged very clearly, and also with the evidence that Nancy mentioned, is the value of green space, accessible green space, public spaces, and it's really obvious where they are and where they're not. We're blessed in London with quite a lot of it, more than most cosmopolitan, metropolitan areas. We have a lot of green space, good historical inheritance there, but they're not all accessible. It really matters that you can use the space freely. It matters also that the space performs multiple functions. We need green spaces to manage heat stress. We need green spaces to manage water runoff, put less stress on our quite old water management systems. We need to think hard about how we walk and cycle and move around between spaces in a city that were not designed for that purpose. And we also need to think about how much we do need to commute. And if we're going to commute, can we commute in a way that's not damaging to the environment and reduces emissions? So we have good promise coming with electric vehicle infrastructure, which needs to be built. And again, built in an accessible way, in an affordable way. And we also need to figure out how we can live and work more closely together so we don't stretch city boundaries too far. This is going to be quite difficult. There'll be some tension now between people's craving for more space, green space, from where they can work, and the idea that we'd like to live more closely together and work more closely together in the centre of the city. This tension hopefully will be creative, but we can't ignore it. It's going to be quite tough to balance out. But I see real promise in it. I think this is one of the areas where we could reinvent and reinvigorate the city. I don't think the city is all over now, baby. I think it's not at all. I think it will be reborn, but it will be greener, and there'll be more people living and working closer together in it. And hopefully there'll be less noise from traffic as well as less pollution from traffic. That's a factor as well that makes the city more livable.
Thank you. And just building on what you were saying about what we might need, what might change as a result of the pandemic, and also in thinking about a more sustainable future and climate change, the changes that we need in the city, I wondered if anyone puts their hands up, could comment on what we have learned from the pandemic that might help us in our response to the climate crisis. Have anybody got any thoughts on that? Yeah, Nancy.
So I was just going to pick up James's point and then pick up your question as well. So James was talking around the role of our places, shared places and spaces in our community, and we can see that how we design our places and spaces can affect our social connection. Everything from how the school gates are organised for pickup and whether we do it. We've closed a huge amount of our social businesses and infrastructure. So our culture, heritage, happiness, sports organisations, which we can see that in the impact on our happiness and the shared collective positive emotion that we have together. But the bit that I wanted to pick up particularly was around the accessibility of the public realm design so that we all have access to it. We know that in green spaces, biodiverse spaces and blue spaces are some of the happiest places that we can be for a whole load of reasons. And doing that with other people, particularly our partners, but also our friends, can make a big difference to our well-being. So you can see things such as the Canal and Rivers Trust looking at how they look at the waterways in terms of the environmental impact that they have, the economic and prosperity impact that they can bring, but also that social impact they bring, the role for volunteers on that waterway, making it an accessible space for all the different groups who want to use it, whether that's running alone or walking a dog or exercising or young women feeling safe on those spaces. So thinking how we use those spaces together has been a real so how we use our beaches, how we use that space has been really exciting. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the pandemic in that. I think the other thing I probably want to say though is the importance of jobs and livelihoods in this, because one of the challenges is of course that the need for a job and employment is really strong and important for our sense of purpose, for a whole lot of things that support our lives, and the needs of any solutions that we get for a climate response need to also make sure that we can continue to have that income, purpose and achievement from our work as well, or volunteering. And so how do we get those two to happen in different contexts, whether that's a city or a town or a rural area? And there'll be different impacts, because the impacts of travel, for example, become much greater if you're in a rural area, whereas in a city you can the impact of a job loss is less because you can travel quite quickly to a new one.
Thank you. That's great. I wondered actually if we can go to our live audience now to see if we've had any questions. Sonia, thank you. Hey.
Yeah. So we have had a question. It's quite specific, so I'll make it a bit more general, but Annette's asked, to what extent does urban/peri-urban farming offer opportunities to provide accessible green spaces that provide fresh food in food deserts? So if we could perhaps make it more general and ask, can you expand on the benefits of green spaces amid COVID, but also going forward, like what can we really take from the green space and what we've learned from COVID to deal with the climate crisis?
Thank you. Does anyone want to come in on that one?
It's pretty amazing. I was just thinking that I forgot to say that we are going to have to grow food in cities. But it's not just because we can now. There's a lot of innovation going on in vertical farming. There's some serious investment going into how we now have the technology to grow lots of foods, but particularly herbs and salads and and various relatively easy to grow vegetables that can be done in a hydroponic way. And so that is going to happen, and it will be a very useful way of cutting down in the distances that food travels, but it also looks highly productive and less wasteful in at least some of the examples we've seen so far, and it will probably bring a little bit of employment too into the cities. But the other reason that I thought of it too late, thank you for the question, is that we've seen huge emphasis on gardening, even in tiny spaces in cities, and how therapeutic this is. We have at last, my wife has an allotment down the road here where, we're pretty much self-sufficient in our own vegetables, thanks to her. But that's been phenomenal therapy for her in her hard working life. And those places are full of all sorts of folk who really enjoy producing their own vegetables. Incredibly valuable experience for them in a tough time, but it can be writ larger than that. There are lots of community schemes now, and they've grown during lockdown. Quite difficult urban spaces have been cultivated. We need to do more of that. There's a lot of wasted space that we can claim back. There's lots of public land that can be claimed back. We've really got to think about these spaces as being productive for food, but therapeutic and socially binding. It's a great thing to do. One more thing about the green spaces. Obviously, very important for amenity and important for health and well-being. But don't underestimate how valuable they are economically. If we are going to reinvigorate city spaces and do something about the things that put off people, like the pollution, bearing in mind that vegetation actually helps us manage that pollution we're bound to still have inside a city, we've really got to think about urban design that includes green spaces all the way through, and even to the point where you track pollinators. In fact, believe it or not, the Crown Estate does this already with its properties down Regent Street. They know where bees go from rooftop to Regent's Park. They know that because they've been doing the research. That's an intelligent way to understand the living organism that's a city. Think about the other creatures, not just the humans.
That's great, thank you. And Tatheer, did you want to come in yet?
Yeah, actually, it was my most favorite question and topic around gardening. So actually, on the grassroots level, we do have the community gardens, and for us, like for a very initial stage, we encourage community to work in community gardens and engage themselves in produce that they can grow their own herbs, vegetables, and enjoy. And it's really therapeutic, as James said. For example, my own example, my husband was like work alcoholic type, and during pandemic he started the community gardening part, and it was really relaxing for him. And as for my son, 3 years old, he also started with us. So it is kind of a thing which we encourage in community, and we train community to use that space and to grow their own vegetables, to feel that the happiness of growing their own vegetables. And also the trainings, the workshops, and Royal Botanics trainings for the compost, for how they can make their land, their part of the plot, and which seeds when they can do it. So these are the basic things. We need to work with kids as well as the community people, whatever the people are, and regardless of their age. So that can create a different city map for greener future, I guess. So I think my point is that, yeah.
I wondered actually if we can have a look now at William's drawing, because I think some of those keywords that we've been talking about are starting to appear. So community and connection, that cities need to be reborn. the practices, practicing kindness, and making these kind of more accessible green spaces, and the role of gardening in terms of being a therapeutic as well. And also we've got how to be creative within constraint. So yeah, thank you. That's great. We'll have a proper look at the drawing at the end, but I just wanted to capture a few of the points as they come up. Now we're going to go on to our next section. So we're going to start to look at what values we need to live sustainably, and we've already started to touch on that. What values do we need to live sustainably, and how can we put them into practice, most importantly? So we've got a few videos again, so if we could play the videos, that would be great, and thank you to those who've contributed. And this will look at sustainable living and changes to the way we view the economy.
Hello, I'm Kennedy. I work at the Climate Justice Organisation platform as a lead campaigner. What values do we need to live more sustainably, and how to put them into action? Very big questions to answer in a minute, but I'm going to do my best. I would say you start by figuring out what values currently underpin our economy and our society. So I would say competition, consumerism, a scarcity mindset that says there's not enough to go around are just some of them. Because only in understanding them can we figure out how to move away from them and towards values that are more conducive to healthier ways of living for the planet and for the people on it. So I would say some of them are kind of regeneration, cooperation, a centering of social well-being and ecological well-being. And how to put them into action, that is a big question. I would say starting by working where you know, so in your local community with your neighbors, your workplaces, and start to kind of cultivate a shared understanding of what these values mean to you and your community in your context. Once you have that, the creative process starts happening of, okay, what social systems and governance structures sit on top of these values that embody those values? And then try and implement some of those things locally. Have a community-run food growing project in your neighborhood that maybe is owned by the local community through a community land trust, right? Or a kind of local food cooperative that is kind of owned and run by its workers in the local community.
Happiness is the thing we want the most for the people we love the most, and it should be the fundamental thing we're aiming for together as a society. But as we look around us, we've clearly got this wrong. Despite decades of economic growth, we've seen no increase in overall well-being. In fact, we've seen rising mental health issues, more loneliness, isolation, inequality. And of course, the recent COVID pandemic has really shone a light on the fact that we've got our priorities wrong as a society. So I think creating this happier world requires a shift in values towards happiness and kindness, which is really all about promoting the happiness of others. And this has big implications for both leaders and individuals. So for leaders, it's about going beyond just thinking about progress in terms of economic growth. It's about the overall well-being of a population. Much greater focus on our mental health, relationships, community, fairness, and of course, the well-being of future generations, which is so important. But as individuals, we can play a role in this. The way we live, the way we treat each other, the way we prioritise things really can make a difference. And that's about the work we're doing really with Action for Happiness, this global community of people who are taking action to put this into practice in their daily lives. And crucially, happier people also tend to live more sustainably. They get less obsessed with possessions and material things and more interested in living a fulfilling life with good relationships and contributing in a way to the world around them.
Humanity's 21st century mission is clear: to meet the needs of all people within the means of this unique and delicately balanced living planet. And this is the donut, a compass to help get us there, ensuring no one falls short on the essentials of life in the hole in the middle, whilst not overshooting the planetary boundaries and Earth's life-supporting systems. Achieving it calls for economies that are regenerative by design, that work with and within the cycles of the living world, and that are distributive by design, ensuring value and opportunity are shared far more equitably amongst all who co-create it. My name's Rob Shorter, and I'm the Communities and Art Lead at Donut Economics Action Lab. Come visit us at donuteconomics.org and find stories of people around the world who are turning these ideas into action, from classrooms to boardrooms, community halls to city halls. And come join us and be a part of this community and contribute your experience your creativity and imagination to this challenge?
Hi, I'm Catherine Trebek. I'm one of the co-founders of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is a global organisation, but also with a Scottish hub, We Are Scotland. And I want to share with you just the hope that for the COP meeting in November this year, that the conversation will very much recognise that the climate emergency is the other side of the coin to the social justice question. And I say coin very deliberately because it is the economy that connects the two. How we design our economic system has huge impact on the prospects of social justice and also the prospects on creating and sustaining a healthy planet. And if we're going to have a chance at addressing those two, we need to really look at what do we measure as success. Is it just faster GDP growth? Or are we going to think about what's the direction of that growth? What's the composition of that growth? What sort of things do we need more of? And actually, what sort of things do we need less of in what we describe as a wellbeing economy, where the economy is designed very much to be in service of those higher order goals of social justice on a healthy planet.
So thanks again to our video contributors, really helpful selection of videos to set off this next section. So Kennedy suggests ways to improve wellbeing through local community projects, valuing cooperation rather than competition. Mark promotes the importance of happiness and kindness. Rob introduced the donut economic model, which suggests that the economy can provide for people's needs within ecological and social limits. And Catherine questions how we measure success, not just economic growth, but as a wellbeing economy. I wondered, James, if we can start with you. Kennedy said we need to start by understanding what values currently underpin our society and economy. So I wondered if you could talk about what values you think currently underpin our economy and society, and then what do we need to live sustainably? And maybe also if you could pick up on this idea of happiness as a goal, and is that something that we could take seriously?
Well, we absolutely should, and I thought they were very good contributions all, and I'll do my very best to briefly connect them. So we have overemphasized competition over cooperation, and we have done that in a way that doesn't really properly understand us as a species. You know, we survive, like so many others, by a combination of cooperation and competition, and we need other species, other elements of the environment in order to thrive and prosper. It's just simple, really. But we've overemphasized one essential value in competition and underemphasized cooperation. I like the idea of regeneration. I think it's a very good concept. I think it applies well to some critical areas of our economy and economic life, like agriculture, for example. I think the concept of regenerative agriculture is a sound one. But equally, I think we are going to have to do something with the system that we have, flawed though it is. And I'm interested in what I sometimes call a sort of judo throw over that system. Sometimes you can do more by using the weight of the system you have to change its direction. So that's why I forced myself, out of, if you like, the comfort of the world of law and policy and working with NGOs like Greenpeace and WWF, into the world of finance, which I was never really comfortable in. But I started Climate Change Capital in order to do something provocative in the name to change, by example, the direction of capital flows. And we had a philosophy of we call creating wealth worth having, which we started almost as a joke, just to amuse ourselves at what could be. But actually it worked, and it worked in more than one language. The idea that just, if you think of every word in that sentence, it makes you wonder, well, what is the worth of this wealth that has been created? Is it really wealth, or is it just money? They're not the same thing. So I'll pick up on a couple of other things that emerged from those contributions that I think are really valuable. One is that we have undervalued nature, taken for granted nature, given no value to nature in our economic affairs. And unless we find a way of doing that, then, as I say, neither the judo throw or the revolution will work, right? There has to be some way in which we can value nature without saying that everything can be turned into a financial value, right? That's the trade-off. It's the same with valuing carbon. We can put a price on carbon, which is a very good proxy for the climate change issue in our industrial and commercial affairs. It can't cover every value we have in our society, obviously. But if we don't have a value for carbon, then we will undervalue and we will waste it. And so much of what finishes up in the atmosphere is effectively waste, right, which we could do something about. We could innovate in a way to prevent less greenhouse gas emissions. We could reward the removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, which we're going to have to do. But we need to do something in the economy we have in order to incentivize that behavior. And finally, on happiness, I was invited to an event by Angela Merkel at the Chancellery a couple of years ago. It was a really interesting gathering. 2 days, and she attended a lot of the time in person and asked a lot of really good questions. And it was all about, could we get rid of GDP or probably reposition GDP amongst other ways of valuing the performance of a society? And the two big issues we looked at were happiness and mental health and climate change and nature, split. And then we merged the groups. And she sat in that period of time and asked a lot of really good questions. That was a serious analysis of the possibility of a major economy rethinking the purpose of government, the way we measure the performance of government, and the metrics that we have that feeds through our whole national statistics and all sorts of other financial metrics that would flow from that, so that we can redirect the flow of investment, public and private, into the kind of society we want to live in the future. So happiness is a great issue, a philosophical issue, but it's also a great practical importance. And I don't think it's a crazy idea that we might take several steps down that route right now, for good reason.
Thank you. I wondered if maybe, Nancy, if you could build on that and consider, how we could move away from a focus on economic growth to, as James said, looking at more social and environmental well-being, and whether you could pick up, Catherine talked about a well-being economy, and I wondered what that might look like in practice.
So this is a really good set of questions. So what is the purpose of that economic growth? It's to improve lives. What is progress? It's improve lives. How do we know whether we've improved lives? We ask people how they are doing, and that is a well-being metric. Where the words happiness and mental health get merged into them quite a lot, and I would just pull them out slightly. So happiness is one metric within this overall how are we doing, and mental health is one of the biggest drivers of our overall well-being, but so is our physical and mental health, so are our relationships, and so is our work. And that's where you get the donut type model, where you get actually there's a really big strong importance of jobs, of livelihoods, of meeting basic needs, of a safety net, and of poverty, and of this achievement, and this need for making it sustainable in the future. And so at the beginning of that conversation, we talked about the values of sort of consumerism and competition, and it's also about individualization and agency. And how you move on from that is to build relationship and build social trust. And you do that through individual positive moments of positive social connection, so that we've got this level of social trust that makes us move towards this. How you achieve that is a whole other different ways of doing it, but you can do this by, it's called investing in capital. And so these measures of progress that James was just talking about, that in Germany, we have them in the UK, the OECD measures a better life index, and it has a broad range of metrics. So the idea there is that you have a number of measures of progress, so this broad range of them, of which you have a way of choosing and weighting things between them, which I would argue is subjective well-being is one way to do that. And you also have this idea of capitals, which are things that you invest in beyond physical infrastructure, but could be natural capital, social capital, economic capital. So we are moving towards making everyone's needs in a way that is properly inclusive and sustainable.
Thank you. And I guess building on that, ideas of the metrics of success, I wondered how do we judge success as a society? I wondered maybe, Dylan, if you could pick up on how do we judge success as a society and how can we really tangibly promote change?
I sort of thought, when I thought about this question, I had in my mind two separate parts. So the first part of it is sort of easier to think about, and I would call it comparable success. It's more graspable and tangible. And a sub part of that is quantitative. So we like data. It's like economic success, wealth, statistical, our carbon footprint or a certain amount of carbon emissions. Or more sort of personally, and this is sort of a reflection of my generation, maybe how many friends you've got on Facebook, the amount of likes or the grades you have. The other part of it is qualitative. So the career you go into, your reputation, your social status, the influence you have, which company you work for, what position you're in, and perhaps what university you go to. And these are things that are a little bit more relatable. We can compare them and say which one is better than the other. The other part of it is a little bit harder, and that is personal success. It's the friendships and relationships we have and the quality of the relationships we have within our family, our children, the quality of our lives, our mental well-being, self-worth. I think we've mentioned this before, personal ambitions and goals, our conceptions of our meaning and purpose. And also something I'd like to draw attention to is moral success. So our character and integrity, who we are, what sort of a person we want to be, how we want to value, perceive, and treat each other. So to lead into the second question about how do we promote change in society, correspondingly, we have a human problem and a technical problem. The technical problem is understanding that that change is needed, what the actual problem is. And unfortunately, even at this point, we have trouble educating, communicating to people that there is actually a problem to be solved. I remember seeing a piece of news maybe a couple of years ago about a senator or congressman bringing a snowball to demonstrate that this is a counterexample to global warming or climate change. So unfortunately, we still have a technical problem of educating people and communicating that what the science is, what is happening. The other aspect of the technical problem is the solutions and the resources to know that change is possible in these ways and what we can do. The human problem, which is the harder one, and to answer the question of how we promote change, is to ask, why bother? So we know that change is needed and we know that change is possible, but how do we sort of find the motivating force to tell people or to motivate people to say change is necessary? Why change? Because I think the majority of people know that there is an issue, but they just can't find the motivation to do anything about it, or they think that is beyond their scope. And I think that's why the conversation of values is so important, because it gets straight to the point of what matters to you in life. It's about possessing the empathy and compassion to realize that the very fundamental things that matter to you, matter to your loved ones, and matter to every other person in the world. And we can understand that, we can communicate that. And to really motivate people to do anything, the most powerful force is to realize that it is personal. Everything that matters in your life is dependent on how we choose to treat what we call home. Nothing from ambitions, dreams, to your joys, to relationships is possible without a place to survive, to sustainably live in. And so to persuade people to change their habits in their day-to-day lives, we have to appeal to what they consider to be important, which is each other, other people, their loved ones, the things that matter to them, to make sustained action possible, to change like the little habits, and to make them understand that no inconvenience, no economic reason, and there is no excuse to not do something. I'm not saying that everybody has to do something big or to sacrifice their livelihoods, but is to know that whoever you are, whatever your role is, you can do something, however little. So for a student, they can't set up a garden in their own homes, but they can choose what transport they take. They can choose to use less plastic, use less water, things like that. And by appealing to their values, we can start changing habits.
Thank you. And Tatheer, yeah, I was going to come to you. I was going to ask as well, I mean, Dylan just talked a little bit about our individual values and then how they relate to our connection with others. So I wondered if you could talk about the values, shared values that you get in a community and how those could be put into action.
Initially, I would like to add a few things with the Dylan's discussion. Initially, I think a pandemic has naturally given a chance for a household to think of their sustainability. And from where I belong, I have seen so many videos, so many pictures, and so many stories that how the pandemic had affected their lives. And even most of the times I have seen the videos where they were struggling for food, basic food. In this position, every country, every household and every family was in the same level. And I feel that if the pandemic had given them a new creativity, new thought, how they can provide food to their family, and the very beginning, very first stage, so they can do their home gardening, things like that. They can have their own milk cows or something. They can keep these things at their home, and it's a basic thing where this environment thing comes in, because people have lost their abilities, what they can do at their home, if they have some space, if they have a little money to start with. So that point, you start the point of happiness and well-being. If you involve yourself in something you can create, you can work with, and then you can get benefit out of it. So that is the basic point from where you can start. The second thing is in the community from where with whom we are working, the interaction of the community level gardening and community level of activities to make them understand that these values will give happiness and will give sustainability in long run. So I think the quality of life, what is the quality of life? That is the quality of life if you are happy. And if you are content, and if you're happy, you have less, but you're happy. So I think that is the most important thing for a family, either they are living here or somewhere in the world. So that is the basic thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we're running out of time now, sadly. So I think we're going to have one quick question from Sonia, and then Sharon will wrap up for us.
Thanks, Claire. So in the comments, we've had an interesting question from an attendee. So New Zealand has a wellbeing budget and Wales has the incorporation of the rights of child in legislation. So what does the panel think about policy-related initiatives like this that really place wellbeing at the center of policy? And similarly, what does the panel think of putting the SDGs at the heart of policy making, and how does that contribute to wellbeing and valuing things for wellbeing?
And for those who don't know, that's the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, so I'm afraid we've only got a couple of minutes. So does anyone want to come in on that? Yeah, Nancy and James.
Just to say two things on Wales and in New Zealand and how you're implementing this in policy making. So firstly, in New Zealand and in the UK and in Wales, we've all got an understanding of this shared how we're doing across this whole broad domain. So not just this indicator of GDPs, but locally, how are we doing? So that's a key part of the Wales legislation, is that it's published for a local area. all this data is accessible and it's used for planning across public services within an area. So what Wales have done, I don't know about the rights of the child in legislation, but certainly they put the SDGs into legislation in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And the big bit of it is it requires that data, which we've got everywhere, including in New Zealand, where they have the Living Standards Framework, which is the basis for that wellbeing budget. The wellbeing budget, of course, is how you spend that money and how you make those choices about priorities and where that money comes from. So a couple of things that I would think would change is that you would shift the priority in terms of mental health. You'd give that parity with physical health, for example. You would massively scale up interventions on mental health that would work. You would also try and work out how you shift money towards prevention rather than just picking up the pieces once people are broken. Actually, Wales have done some interesting things around prevention in legislation. But I don't think anyone's quite cracked this, and we do need to continue to invest in that methodological bit about how we make the choices for a wellbeing budget.
James, did you want to just quickly add?
Super quick. Yesterday's London Sustainable Development Commission release of the Sustainable Development Goals for London is a good piece of work to have a look at. The rights of the child idea is strong, and it helps you deal directly with fairness, justice, and intergenerational equity. I've been working with the lawyers who are working with Greta Thunberg and others with their petition on the rights of a child, which is currently in litigation. And it reminds me also that don't forget that the law, which is it is our best expression of ourselves, that is our will to perfection. That's what we wish for ourselves, to be governed well by the rule of law. That is a very proper place to put these principles in, because then they provide a structure and a reference point for decision making in our society after that. So to keep that in mind, that's the law is an ideal and it's for us.
Oh, well, thank you so much to our panel. That was really fantastic to hear from you. And I'm sure we could have talked all day about this because there was so much to cover. Sharon is now going to do a little summary of the topics that we've covered today.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks everyone for a fantastic discussion. And William, I wonder if you could focus on the picture of practicing kindness in the top right-hand corner. What we've heard today, sorry, the other top corner, yeah, there we go, thanks. What we've heard today is that what we value and what we've learned to value in the pandemic is really the connections that exist between us as people, as friends, families, and members of communities. And those things are really important to really practice empathy and compassion. We've also heard that the connections that we make with nature and valuing nature, and the tree that William's got here in the centre of his diagram, I think is really important. The nature and the local environment where we live are also important if we're going to live a more sustainable life. We've heard about the need to get greater cooperation, the need to build on the creativity that we've experienced under lockdown, the importance of regeneration, the importance of meaningful jobs that satisfy us not only in terms of providing for our livelihoods, but also addressing our sort of social and mental and physical health needs. And we've heard about the many skills and actions that we can develop to try and live more sustainably. And Tatheer's a community from her videos really illustrates this very well, and how things like gardening, sewing, digital engagement can all sort of really build those connections between people and the places that they live in. We've heard about the importance of building trust between different people in society, and the need to really rethink the purpose of government, to rethink the purpose of the economy, so it's focused on well-being. So thank you all for the fantastic discussion. I'd like to thank each and every one of the panel members, but also our amazing video contributors. They've really made the issues come alive, and by sharing their personal experiences, that's really helped. I'd like to thank the Sustainability First team. They've done an amazing job in pulling this event together. And I'd like to thank National Grid, who sponsored this series. And we've got a very quick video from Duncan Burt, the COP lead at National Grid, to share with you now.
Hi, my name is Duncan Burt. I'm part of the National Grid team leading our engagement with COP26. We're delighted to be sponsoring this series of events with Sustainability First. If we are going to have a fair and just transition away from carbon, we need to make sure we have a diverse range of voices, views, and opinions feeding into that. So we'll be working with Sustainability First after this to feed into the COP26 conference. So thank you very much for your engagement. We hope you find it interesting. We'll be listening with interest, and we hope you enjoy.
So thanks again to National Grid. And I'd just like to say that please do join us at our next event, which is on the 20th of April, where we'll be exploring how we can put these values into practice to live more sustainably. And in the meantime, do keep an eye out on our Sustainability First website. We're shortly going to be launching a new prize, not an essay prize, but a writing prize this time and an art prize in terms of the societal change that we need to see to address the climate crisis. So thank you for joining us today. Have a good afternoon.